I think you should be able to hear me now. So, been playing around on OBS Studio. Okay. Yeah, my stream's current bit rate is flagging again. I think it's due to my internet provider. Alrighty. So, wait till a couple people jump on to get into some of the topics I wanted to cover on this. So, what thing here? Drink another beer. My next video is going to be, I did a what would an all-out strike by Russia against the United States look like, and what the casualties would look if they're trying to go for mass casualties. I did one where the United States against China, doing the same kind of thing. This time I'm going to do China against the United States. I start to do the United States with an all-out strike against Russia. I haven't done that one yet, but I'm going to do the Chinese strike against the United States. I think it's interesting because a lot of the recent developments, especially we're looking at some of the articles. So on this live stream, I wanted to kind of show how I start these videos, and it always starts with the same kind of process. So I'll get into that in a second here. I'll start getting into it now. So the first thing I always do is anytime I want to make a video, I look at the most current nuclear order of battles. And so in this case, there's one I have here loaded. This is from the Federation of Atomic Scientists, and it's updated for 2024 estimates. And then I also have another one from the James Martin group. This is a little more in depth in the fact that, well, I mean, they're both, more to it, but this one really goes into, it's like a 40 or 50 page document. And I'm going to kind of, if there's a discrepancy between the two, this one tries to do like estimates for 2028. I'm going to try to keep it to where we're at right now, as far as best estimates for the current time, and go off of that. But that's always my starting point, is to find where's the consensus at what the current arsenal is. I don't want to go off of what 2020 is, because China is updating their nuclear forces. Whereas the United States nuclear forces haven't changed a whole lot, at least in the last few years. China is doing some updates to their systems. They're adding warheads to their stockpile. So right now, currently, from what at least the Federation of Atomic Scientists is saying, that they have 238 deployed intercontinental range ballistic missiles. They've also got 72 submarine launched missiles. And then there are about 10 aircraft, which I'll probably discount the aircraft altogether for reasons I'll get into when it's a very small number like that. And what they would have to do in order to get to the United States to strike them, I just don't find it a realistic proposition that those 10 would get through. So I will focus on the ICBMs and the sub-launched missiles. And so then from that point, I kind of take those numbers, and then I'll go into the nuclear war simulator. So let me fire that up. You can see a shot of my Steam, which is about as random and as I am, for that matter. So you have some stuff like Mad Max, some of my wife's games, some wargaming, some silly wargaming like the Total War Warhammer stuff, and then some little more sophisticated stuff like Grigsby's War in the East. So let me fire that up. Nuclear War Simulator. And so I will take that, and I always use as a base. Somebody made a mod and they put it on there, and it was World Arsenals. Whoops. Well, hopefully you guys can still see, because I can't. Let me adjust the settings real fast here. This is what happens when you wing it. Okay. And so I start, as my base scenarios, I always start with this one, World Arsenals with Iran and North Korea. It's not perfect, but it's a base, because they placed a lot of stuff. And then what I'll do is I'll subtract or add from there. So, this is what we'd be looking at for China. And so they have a certain number of like subs. And you can take a look, like this is one of their JL2s. You see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 12 of them. So 72 is what the estimated number is. So if I look at all the subs, I'm going to guess that each of these have 12. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. And I believe that's it. I believe it's just those 4. So some quick hillbilly math. 4 times 12 is going to be 48. And so that's actually less than what the current estimate is. So that's where I would then go through, okay, then I need to add. So I would add, go through here, unit placement, change it to China, surface, submarine bases. Okay. So this gives me more than what I need, but it gives me a base to start working from. So what I would do is I would take this and I would set location. And their range is a little bit less, so I'll end up having to move them. And so that would give me now 5, beyond these, except for, not counting these. And 5 times 12 would be 60, so I need 1 more. So I'm going to go to this one. Set that. Okay. Close that out and then come back here and delete that. So now I have the 72 sub-launch missiles that I need. And that's really where I go off of it. And then I have to, okay, how many land-based ICBMs? And then do they have any of the older systems that have been phased out? So the Dofeng 4 has been phased out. So I'd have to look for that and say, okay, is there any of those? And that's the basic process. So I find any units that shouldn't be there, and I get rid of them, and I add any units that need to be added to get me to the number that's closest. So here's 3 of the Dofeng 4. So I would be, sometimes it's a little tricky. Sometimes you got to make sure you actually captured everything. So I would go ahead and just delete all those just to get rid of them. You remember, this is just simulating a Chinese strike against the United States. So it's not that important that the bases are in the correct location. What's important is that the units are correct to be able to fire and target. So what I would do is, so get rid of those. Do I need to add? So do I need to add, Dofeng 5s? Do I need to add whatever to get to the numbers I need to be at? Or the closest approximation. And then if I don't want to try to add units that aren't in here that I know exist, what I'll do is, so if they don't actually exist, at this point I always go through and save. So I'll start this. This will be the first phase to save. So come in and just say China all out strike. And I'll save it as sandbox. Oops. And I always adjust the year and stuff too. So say 2024. Every scenario I run, I'm setting it September 9th, 2024 right now. If nuclear war breaks out on September 7th, 2024, it'll be crazy. I'll be able to look at these videos. My channel will just blow up. But so will we. So it'll kind of be a wash. But man, that would be crazy. And so anytime I do that, so go ahead and save again. Save a sandbox, overwrite. So say there's a weapon system or a missile and it doesn't exist. I'll find the stats and I'll do it as a single detonation and just enter it in. So if it's, say they have a 3.2 megaton warhead and somewhat accuracy, say 1.2 kilometers. And then you can set the height to whatever you want it to be, and I'll do it as a single detonation. And so my preference is hopefully they got the units. That's the preference because it gives the visuals of actually traveling and making the strike, which is always far more impressive. And then, so also what I'll do is I want to test it out and make sure it works. So like in this situation, because of the range of these, usually got to set them a little closer. So target, say height 250. And this is just me messing around here. I'm not going to save this because this isn't the goal, but you can go through and start placing targets. I'm not gonna hit down here in the Baja because I don't want to strike Jesse Ventura. So I'm gonna avoid the Baja, but I will get San Diego. So you set those targets. Oops, didn't mean to do that. But long story short, you set the targets, then you click and attack. But I can do it automated too, so I'm just gonna say target. Counter value. And then it happens. Of course, that's the AI choosing the targets. I've proven definitively I am far better than the AI at choosing targets. Completely obliterated them. At 2.4 million. So that's kind of the process. So I'll test it out every time I do that. I'm targeting all individually now manually, but I run through, I'll do it, and I'll test it, and then I'll come back and reload it. So I'll come back in here and reload from prior to that point and keep working. So that's the basic process. So I'm still in the, what did I load? Oh, sorry, loaded the wrong one. This is the one I wanted to load. And so that's the basis process. So I'm still in the kind of research phase well, I've done the research. Now it's really placing the units. And then it's going to be testing and doing the targets and getting it to where it needs to be. So that's the process to go through there. I'm going to do the targeting tomorrow. I have some stuff I have to do around the office here. And so if I'm not able to get it done to be able to post the video tomorrow, I'll do a live working session where I'm actually placing the targeting and stuff, but I'll plan that ahead so people have fair warning. This is not a working session. This is just this is a live stream, but I've been doing some of these rambling rants where I'm just talking off the cuff here. So, but that's kind of the process. Look at these, go through that stuff. The real time is spent either placing units or the targeting. Once you execute, it doesn't take that long. So, it's trickier to do targeting for other countries. So, for instance, it won't take me too long to do the Chinese striking against the United States. They have a fraction of the amount of warheads that the United States has. And B, I'm much more familiar with U.S. geography than I am Chinese geography. And so I know where the cities are, and I know, it's just an easier process. So that'll be a fairly easy one. It'll be a little trickier when I do the U.S. all-out strike against Russia. Because, well, obviously, Moscow will be a huge targeting location, but it'll be very similar to how I did with China, where I'll just look at the top 100 city population-wise and then kind of go from there. So, some nuclear war news. A lot of stuff right now. Nuclear war is a hot topic. So we have this article from the Washington Post. Chinese nuclear arsenal undergoing significant growth. I use a hack with archiving to be able to see behind paywalls. Again, this is what I consider one of those, I wouldn't say shit posting, but when it says it could have as many intercontinental ballistic missiles as the United States by 2030, a new report says that's a could, but also keep in mind the majority of our warheads are based on our sub-launch ballistic missiles. We're down to just over 400 some odd ICBM silo-based missiles, and those all have one single warhead. And so the majority of our arsenal, warhead-wise, is either contained on subs or aircraft. And so that's where the bulk majority is. And so that's, again, where some of these headlines and everything, you have to look at what's behind it. I will say that they're definitely aggressively expanding their arsenal. For a long time, they were kind of on par with France. They still have a very long way to go to catch up to the United States and Russia, with the United States and Russia being roughly parity, although, again, there's a difference there, with, again, the majority of the United States being based on subs and the majority of Russia being based land-based. And so it's not exactly equal. Now, the question will be survivability and everything like that, and that gets into a whole different topic. So there's that. Watchdog warns reliance on nuclear weapons rising amid global tensions. So the world's 9 nuclear-armed states have raised their reliance on nuclear weapons, a watchdog group says. I would come back and say, how? How are they relying on nuclear weapons? Because nobody's using nuclear weapons. So they are increasing their spending on modernizing their atomic arsenals. They definitely are. There is an aggressive, I'd say, campaign for some non-nuclear armed nations to get nuclear weapons. I always try to point back to what happened with Iraq in 2003, what happened with Libya in 2011, and what happened with, you can even go back to Serbia. It gave, for what would be considered probably more authoritarian states, incentivize that if they get nuclear weapons, they won't necessarily face an invasion or airstrikes or other things from Western powers. On the flip side now, Russian actions against Ukraine, Chinese aggressiveness in the South China Sea has done the same thing for more Western aligned nations, to where you had talks about potentially staging nuclear weapons in Japan, South Korea getting staged nuclear weapons. It always increases talks after that. Why? Well, people can look at North Korea, and they can look at even Iran, who doesn't have a fully functioning nuclear weapon that we know of, but could potentially even have some dumb bombs right now, or dirty bombs potentially. But even the potential of having a very limited nuclear arsenal can change what strategic options are available to the United States and other Western countries that have a greater conventional superiority of weapons or military capabilities. So it incentivizes, no doubt about it. So they also follow up to say that the global inventory is reduced in 2024 compared to 2023. They talk about deployed, a larger number is actually deployed. Although China is believed to have some warheads on high operational alert for the first time. Again, that's, hard to say. Then it comes back to say the U.S. is responsible for 80% of the rise in spending. Well, the Sentinel, the replacement for the Minuteman III, the Sentinel, cost is overrunning. Now, it doesn't really represent a great leap by any stretch of the imagination in capabilities. It's just a more modern missile, but it's not going to be deploying a greater number of warheads. It's not going to be deploying a greater number of yield. So again, yes, the spending's high, but it's not actually increasing the nuclear arsenal. It's replacing the nuclear arsenal. And the stockpiles have remained relatively stable. So again, these headlines kind of kill me sometimes. And the Guardian says the same thing. It's an increase in spending. Yes, there's a lot of actual, harsh feelings. There's a lot of controversy about the cost of the Sentinel replacement, or the cost of the Sentinel that's replacing the Minuteman. So, kind of like when I talked about the video yesterday, when I talked about the Russian military experts suggest that Kremlin plans nuclear strikes on U.S. ships. Are they training drills around that? Have they built strategies around that, tactics around that? Yes. But when you say plans to, I go back to say, well, if I tell my wife I plan to order pizza tonight, she's going to have the expectation I'm going to order pizza. Like, that's going to happen. Versus, again, saying, well, if we were to order, when we order pizza next, or if this happens, if the power goes out, we can order pizza from this place. This is an option. It's just, again, I think it's misleading headlines that create sensationalism. Now, there's very real, potential touch points that could lead to nuclear weapons being used. That's not to say that's not a possibility. I'm just saying that there's some definite sensationalism behind these headlines. So, it's nuclear war news, something I'm just trying to cover a little bit as I see things kind of pop up in relevancy behind the topic. So, on the training front, no training today. We did some cardio, but no lifting. Last night, sitting on the sofa towards the end of the night, every part of my body ached. And just been training really hard. And to my wife, I said, no matter how good I feel in the morning, no matter how good I feel in the morning or later in the day, don't let me talk us into hitting, weights. I have a very, genetically speaking, I can recover from training and recover from stuff very well. So I can feel like crap after training or that night. I feel like $1,000,000 in the morning. But I know if I were to do something today, I'd probably feel like crap again at night. At some point, you gotta back down a little bit. I'm not a big believer in like deloads or stuff like that, but you gotta listen. Sometimes say, hey, maybe it'd be a good idea just to do some light activity, and everything. And I know I covered a little bit in my video yesterday because how annoying what I consider that whole natty or not movement and stuff, and just brings up because I come into pro wrestling and stuff, and talked about Bret Hart a little bit, and I was continuing reading his book today, and I was like, man, I just stand by the fact that guy's such a narcissist. He's always having the greatest matches, and anytime he wasn't the main event, whoever's in the main event, their match sucked, and the crowd couldn't wait for it to end, and, he was always getting all the adorning and stuff. I mean, it's just like, man, guy's such a mark for himself. It's just insane. Still so bitter and stuff. But I bring up the topic because, he admits to using steroids in his book and everything. Of course, says he didn't use it as much as other people and stuff. And look, he probably didn't. There's no doubt about it. He probably, he wasn't probably certainly like the warlord from the Powers of Pain. I'm sure. If you're not familiar with who he is, let's see. Of course, I'm gonna pull up a video where years later, but man, there's one in there, man. A guy was just friggin' ginormous. That's not a bad one right there. That was earlier in his career. That's the one I was thinking of. Obviously Bret Hart wasn't probably doing anything to the level of cycle he was, and by that matter, the warlord, big Polish guy, I'm sure naturally was probably a bigger guy anyways. But people, it goes back, and this is what I think the natty or not thing is so silly. People, and even wrestling fans, until he said it, would say, oh, well, he wasn't like, Ultimate Warrior was, or Hulk Hogan and stuff. Everybody thinks there's some defining marker somebody's taking steroids or not. And it's not always the case. There's tons and tons of different kinds, and they can produce different results. Some of them are going to be more androgenic, some of them more anabolic, and some can make you increase water weight. Some are going to add more size or strength. Some are not going to add as much size or strength. So it's not always going to be necessarily readily apparent. And I'll come back to, who's that guy? Honky Talk Man. Because he's another guy that misses steroids. Now, to the average person, see this guy and think steroids. Obviously, you could tell somebody like that works out, trains and stuff, but it would never jump out and say, yeah, this guy's on the sauce. There may have been a small amount of time, but even that, I've known plenty of people that never touched steroids that were well better built, and so I still get a kick and a laugh out of it. I know wrestling fans in general, and look, I was a wrestling fan when I was a kid, and I still have an appreciation behind everything. I still get a kick out of how they're still like marks. They still, to separate the reality. I would think, when I watched the first Ultimate Fight, I didn't watch the first Ultimate Fight Championship. I watched the second one. So the second one never happened. It was either 93 or 94. I was still, I was just a young teenager. I watched it with my dad. And I thought it put wrestling out of business, to be honest with you. I was like, this stuff's real. These guys are actually doing what wrestling pretends to do. And you still, there's somebody was talking about like The Undertaker and Brock Lesnar, because they had a confrontation after one of Brock Lesnar's fights. Now, The Undertaker will be the first person to tell you that was a work. It wasn't meant to be like a real thing, like they were going to really fight, and that he wouldn't last 2 seconds in an MMA fight with Brock Lesnar. Some wrestling fans still think like somehow would. And to me, I get a kick out of that because, and a lot of people even point to Brock Lesnar and say, well, pro wrestlers are just as tough as MMA guys because look at Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar was an NCAA wrestling champ. Legitimate wrestling champ. Legitimate, very high-level athlete. He wasn't just a pro wrestler. He was a very legitimate, credentialed amateur wrestler in college. And so, yeah, somebody like that would do phenomenal. Somebody like the older wrestler back, Danny Hodge, who was a well-regarded amateur boxer and a very well-regarded amateur wrestler. Yeah, absolutely, he would have done a phenomenal job. Some exceptionally tough guys, had they went into MMA when they were much younger, they would have done a good job. But the reality is, look, they had that boxing thing they did in the 90s, that Brawl for It All. And Bart Gunn won it. And he KO'd the other guys he went up against. And it's supposedly one of the toughest wrestlers ever, Dr. Dusty Williams. Dr. Dusty Williams was a legitimate wrestler, too. Amateur wrestler. He met and took on Bruce Baumgartner, the Olympic champ. Having said that, his stand-up striking was terrible. And I remember Bart Gunn KO'd the 3 guys he fought, put him against Butterbean, and he got knocked out in like 10 seconds. Why? Because there's a huge difference between somebody that's a tough brawler and somebody that's legitimate. And Butterbean, for whatever faults, was a legitimate pro boxer. He had tons and tons of pro boxing fights, and he got into MMA and stuff. And he is nowhere near the top when it came to boxing. So when it comes to MMA, when it comes to boxing, any actual combat sport, the guys that are very highest level, the weekend warrior types, they're not going to stand a chance. So I just get a kick out of that sometimes. Now, I would say a lot of pro wrestlers did come from a legitimate amateur background. But even that, if you haven't done it for a long time and then you build up injuries and stuff, you're probably not going to perform that well. And Dr. Dusty Williams did an actual MMA fight. And this was after the Brawl for All, and he got knocked out. And it was terrible. He took on a Russian kickboxer, Alexiev something, and he got brutalized. Just KO'd in seconds. Now, he found out he had cancer, and it ended up killing him. He found out he had cancer like the night before the match. There was a lot of stuff to it. But the fact is that, yes, these wrestlers, especially in the 80s and 70s, yeah, they go out and get in bar fights and beat guys up because they're going to be tougher than your average guy. They're all mostly athletes. They're all, they're all big guys. They're all strong guys. Most of them were juiced up and stuff. Yeah, they're going to go in a bar and beat up vast majority of your bar, your bar brawlers. They're not going to take on professional fighters, unless they have a very legitimate background or training. Got a kick out of that. So, the other thing I wanted to cover, I don't know if there's a lot more. Yeah, I think I'm 37 minutes into this. So anyways, I appreciate the people that jumped on to watch the video. I'm going to finish the Chinese all-out strike on the United States. I hope to have it posted up tomorrow. If I don't, I'll do a live working session so we can take a look at it. I do have some stuff going on. Got to move some stuff around the office. Then got to hit some arm training and stuff. That's my favorite time to do videos, though, because I can't do anything else because I'm barely functioning. So I love to grab a beer. No, I got to cut out the beer too soon. But thanks, everybody. Have a great night. And